As more states take up controversial abortion legislation, the hot-button issue is expected to be a major sticking point in the 2020 election. Just yesterday, dozens of Stop the Ban protests took place across the nation.
Also taking center stage, of course, Medicare for all and how we approach the new economy. But how did we get to this point anyway? And what Democratic candidate will prove electable and why? We are looking for answers to all these questions and more. And in his new book, We've Got People, The Intercept's D.C. Bureau Chief Ryan Grim takes a deep dive into the history of the Democratic Party and chosen candidates by Dems. He joins us to talk about that book and help us understand where we are heading. Ryan, great to see you. Thanks for coming by.
Great to see you, yeah.
Congrats on the book. So first, it's coming out on
Tuesday, May 28th.
Tuesday, May 28th.
Yeah.
Okay, mark it down. Buy the book.
Get your copy.
What did you want
Get
to?
2 copies.
There you go. What did you want people to take from this book? Why did you write it?
And there are a bunch of different takeaways.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's a reported history. If you read to the epilogue, I'll give you kind of my opinion on what some of this stuff means. But a lot of it, I just wanted to lay out what the history of the internal party struggle has been the last 30 years or so, because a ton of people, and so I've been covering Congress since 2006, but I really noticed in 2015 when Bernie Sanders ran for president, and then after Trump won the presidential election, a whole new wave of people started paying attention to politics in a way that they hadn't before, where they had been kind of casually following along, and now all of a sudden they wanted to know, what's PAYGO? Where did this come from? And why? Who are these new Dems? Who are these blue dogs? Why is the Progressive Caucus so pitiful? Questions like that had never occurred to them because they didn't care at all. So it charts this history so people can kind of decide for themselves, like where they think they fit in this internal struggle within the Democratic Party. And I kind of start with Jesse Jackson's run for president in 1988, which nobody really takes seriously. And at the time, a lot of people didn't take seriously. But he came within inches of winning that nomination. And that's a moment that's just gone down the memory hole. After about 37 primaries and caucuses, he won an upset in Michigan. Gebhardt drops out, and now it's just him and Dukakis, and they're neck and neck in delegates. 37 primaries in.
Wow.
And he's polling ahead in Wisconsin, which is coming up next. And if he wins Wisconsin, he's cruising to the nomination.
Wow.
Complete meltdown in Washington. The place just goes berserk. Democrats start thinking, how are we going to stop this guy? They drafted Andrew Cuomo. They drafted Mario Cuomo, Andrew's daddy, to go to the convention and challenge Jackson at the convention if Dukakis couldn't stop him.
Wow.
And so it's this moment where the party had to decide, we're going to go this kind of rainbow coalition direction where we kind of register as many people as we possibly can and go with the boldest progressive agenda we can, or we're going to go with the electable guy, Michael Dukakis.
Yeah,
Nice,
super electable.
Safe guy like Dukakis. And we saw how that one turned out.
Why was Jackson so appealing? Why was he able to have such success?
Well, his platform was entirely different from what everybody else was arguing for. For one, it was kind of like a Bernie Sanders version of a platform at that time, calling for single-payer health care, gay rights, women's rights. So a lot of things that didn't really come around until, that didn't become mainstream in the party for a long time after that. But he also talked about the economic violence that Wall Street and corporations were doing to people, and so he made a direct appeal to kind of the Reagan Democrats. Right. Say, look, no, Reagan's doesn't care about you. This is the party.
It's a class-based appeal.
Yeah, and there was this farm crisis going on at the time, which we have again today. Perhaps even a worse farm crisis now, but it was acute at the time. Farmer suicides were high, farm closures were high, consolidation was going on, and Jackson appealed directly to these farmers. And there's this famous photo of a ton of farmers who come out to a Jesse Jackson rally with paper bags over their heads.
Wow.
You can Google this, find this photo, because they supported everything about Jackson, but didn't want to
be public about it.
Be known in their town that they were supporting Jesse Jackson for president. And there was a lot of kind of protest voting going on. And so one of the things I think happened is that when it became clear he actually had a shot of winning, then a ton of the white progressive voters were like, whoa. I was just sending a signal to the party.
I wasn't serious.
You didn't tell me this guy was going to win. And so I think that's why the polls were wrong in Wisconsin, that people, and also that the entire party apparatus came down on him, just warning Democrats, if you nominate this guy, you know, the country's going to fall apart and the Democratic Party will cease to exist. Same arguments that you see around Sanders and to a lesser extent.
Well, that's
Warren.
what I want to get to. It doesn't seem to me like things have changed very much. It's 2020. Joe Biden is being wholly, you know, the warm embrace of much of the party, a return to 2012. And yet you see really a lot of groundswell support for Elizabeth Warren, for Bernie Sanders, for a lot of the ideas that you're talking about here. Tell us about that thesis in your book about electability and what it really means to have a maybe mile-wide but inch-deep candidacy like Joe Biden's going up against Trump.
I think Democratic primary voters are an interesting bunch. I mean, they've been told their entire lives that they live in a conservative country, or at least a center-right country. And that their vision for the country is one that the rest of the people reject. And so many of them have internalized that. And so they will say, well, I like Elizabeth Warren, or I agree with everything that Bernie Sanders stands for. But these other people, or I like Jesse Jackson back in 1988, but these other people who I don't know, but who I've been told exist, they would be more likely to support Walter Mondale or Michael Dukakis. Or Bill Clinton even won in 1992 with 43% of the vote. A lot of people forget this. Say, well, look, we went with Bill Clinton and he won. Yeah, he won 43%.
It's only because of Ross Perot, right?
He also ran as more of a populist candidate. I mean, the way he governed was in fact quite different than how he ran in that initial campaign. Kind of a populist-y guy in 92. That's totally right. And then I go a lot through the Howard Dean campaign in the book. Democrats loved Howard Dean. They loved that he was anti-war. They loved that he was making health care, you know, a priority, the doctor from Vermont. And then at the last moment, they're like, let's go with this electable guy, John Kerry, because he was a veteran, and there's no way that Republicans are going to be able to undermine a veteran. How could that possibly happen? Or, of course, the very electable Hillary Clinton in very recent history.
The very electable Hillary Clinton. The only time that they have disregarded that devil on their shoulder saying that this person isn't electable is Barack Obama. Right. They went for it. And he was elected, and he was elected twice. But they didn't learn the lesson of that time, that if you go with what you believe in, then you actually have a chance of winning.
I mean, I think kind of the perfect encapsulation of that point that you're making is Medicare for all. Because no matter how you poll it, people are like 70% of people, I mean, a lot of polls, a majority of Republicans are like, yes, Medicare for all. Yet we have the leading Democratic contender who's afraid that this is too far too fast. What is that all about?
I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to these Reagan years where people like Joe Biden, like Pelosi, Hoyer, Schumer, they all lived through this period of time where they just felt like the country had rejected them, and that if they're honest about their progressive values, they're going to be turned out. Yeah. And so that's why you have this bizarre argument that we can't do Medicare for all because we have to defend the Affordable Care Act. Well, what does one have to do with the other? You can, like, it makes so little sense. You can't even interrogate it for 5 seconds before it falls apart. But it only makes sense if you believe that kind of psychically they feel like if we say that we support Medicare for all, then the country will turn on us 100%. And after they turn on us, then they'll destroy the ACA. Right. That's the only way
they'll say we're socialists. Well, they say we're socialists anyway. So.
Right.
Brian, you know, one of the things I've always admired about The Intercept is you're willing to take shots at Democrats. You have a lot of good reporting on centers and neoliberal Democrats within the party. Why do you think it's so important to try and focus on this message to drive the progressive movement in this direction? So, one, it's just important to do the journalism that's in front of you. Like, if we can find stories that are interesting to people, we should do those. But historically, it's also interesting to watch what happens if a kind of center-left party is unwilling to actually deliver materially for the people that it's supposed to represent. That's the kind of thing that can open the door for fascists or some far-right movement to come in and say, look, they promised this, they didn't deliver, we will. And I alone can fix it. Somebody like Trump or somebody like Bolsonaro coming in and saying, look, these
this weak center-left party in Brazil didn't deliver for you, and we locked Lula up.
Right.
So give it to the fascist Bolsonaro. In the UK, in the mid-'70s, the British Labour Party took over right before Margaret Thatcher, and there were people in the Labour Party there saying we need to kind of basically nationalize this, and we need to just, we need to crush the power of the financial institutions in the UK, or else runaway inequality is going to grip the UK. Those people were kind of beaten back within the Labour parties. They just delivered like some kind of milquetoast reform, which wasn't what an angry British population wanted. So they brought in Thatcher, who then did exactly what they'd been threatening to do. So there's a real risk. Like the Democratic primary voters are very risk averse.
Yeah. Well,
but there's another risk out there.
Put that in the context of the Obama years, because this is one of the challenges too for Democrats who are challenging Biden in the primary is people don't honestly care that much about 30 years ago. They have a lot of affection for Joe Biden because of him being a good partner to Barack Obama. But there were a lot of problems with the Obama years, right? The banks got bailed out and homeowners did not, right? No one was held accountable. The majority of the jobs that were lost in the crash were middle-income jobs. The majority of jobs that came back were low-income jobs, right? There were a lot of issues there, but it's very hard to interrogate that because the Democratic base also has this tremendous fondness and pride around Barack Obama. So how do you deal with that?
So I get into this a couple ways in the book. First is the hand that Obama was dealt, which was dealt by people like Rahm Emanuel and Nancy Pelosi, who throughout the 2000s, kind of embraced this idea that Democrats had to be as conservative as possible to win over these troglodyte people that they don't understand and who liked Reagan for some reason. And so, as a result, in 2006, when they finally took over Congress in that blue wave back then, they did so with a ton of right-wing Democrats, people who would be just completely tossed out of the party at this point, like anti-LGBT, anti-immigrant, anti-this, anti-that, anti the entire Democratic agenda, effectively, but they would call themselves Democrats. Most of them, lots of them, were veterans, and Emanuel insisted that they not oppose the Iraq War, yet they won kind of on an anti-war energy. That's how weird two-party politics is.
Right.
And so as a result, in 2006 and 2008, the Congress was made up of this very kind of center-right Democratic Party that they had to appease. You had the Progressive Caucus, but you had to get all of these people who'd been brought in 06 and 08 under this idea that you had to have conservatives. So now, let's say Obama did want to pursue the most aggressive agenda. He now has to get it through all of these right-wing Democrats who are going to slow it down on the Hill. They made sure that his stimulus was too small, and I think the midterms were baked in right there. Once instead of coming with a huge stimulus that puts everybody back to work and kind of reshapes the economy, they came in with this $700+ billion.
A lot of which was tax cuts, by the way.
A lot of tax cuts to try to get Republicans. But then separately, Obama bears a lot of the blame as well for bringing in people like Rahm Emanuel, and he brought them in because he largely agreed with their mindset, but Rahm Emanuel, Tim Geithner, Larry Summers, the types of people who just believe off the bat, we can only do this much, or we should only do this much. Some of it was moral. Like they like Larry Summers thought it was wrong to fix the housing crisis and the foreclosure crisis. And that as much as anything led to the Trump and Tea Party pushback, as millions and millions of foreclosures. And so there were these kind of twin related problems. One was that they were set up to fail by the Congress that they had built, but then they didn't actually want to do a lot of the things.
I mean, he kept going back to the Republicans for that grand bargain again and again.
Wanted that grand bargain. And so he felt like imagine this, the night of the election, and a couple of people from Obama for America raised this possibility. Imagine the night of the election, he says, we're going to create 10 million jobs. I want a $2 trillion stimulus. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And I want 10 million people to join me and sign on to this platform and promise to call your members of Congress, come to Washington. Congress at that time was deadly afraid of him. Like, who is this guy with this massive army of volunteers out there? And if he had done that, could he have pushed a bigger agenda through in that crucial window? And dare Republicans, Okay, you think $700 billion stimulus is too small? Dare them to vote against it the way that the bailout went down. Look what happened. The bailout went down, Wall Street crashed. A week later, they passed the bailout. Do that with the stimulus. There were a lot of things that they could have done. Instead, they shut down that kind of grassroots army. Like they basically mothballed the whole thing, moved it under the DNC, and it was specifically for the reason that you said. They wanted to work with Republicans on these deals, and they felt like you have to be nice to them.
Yeah.
You can't pressure them, because if you pressure them, then they're going to get upset.
Right.
And if they get upset, then they're not going to bargain with you.
Ryan, are you heartened where you see the state of the party? I mean, you've had some victories, right? We have Bernie Sanders, who's the #2 candidate in this field. We have Elizabeth Warren. Many of the ideas, the things that you're talking about, are not necessarily mainstream, but we're talking about it, right? So do you think that things are moving in the right direction, or do you fear that another establishment coup really will happen in 2020 for the Democratic Party?
The disheartening part is that there's so little time, to turn it around under the system that we understand, because in kind of a post climate change era of extreme austerity created by resource collapse, that's a whole nother ball game. So it almost as if like they're making a comeback, but there's 30 seconds left in the game. Sure. they might not have enough time to get it done, and so that's frustrating. But that same urgency, I think, has created the energy that is now driving like the Sunrise Movement and the Ocasio-Cortezes of the world. And because there's so much bottom-up energy, it's showing that you don't actually need big money anymore. And so to the extent that big money has been a negative influence on the party and hurt it in terms of not just its ability to deliver, but relatedly its ability to get elected. People are like, what is this party? Like, let's go with this. Let's go with this one that we understand. That's heartening, because you have all of these candidates who now they have to think about what's the idea that I can put out there that will get people excited enough that they will volunteer for me and that they will give money to my campaign, rather than how do I come up with some type of legislative strategy that gets banks interested in donating to my campaign, or gets merchants like Home Depot interested in donating to my campaign. Like, entire legislative agendas have been constructed around just trying to extract money from corporate PACs. Like you force them to fight each other, and both sides have to give you money.
Right.
And if that's what you're spending your time on, then you're not thinking about the kinds of things Elizabeth Warren is thinking about. Like she has foregone not just corporate PAC money, but also these big dollar fundraisers where $10,000, $25,000 to have dinner and hear her give some goofy speech that's sometimes public, sometimes not.
She gives good speeches.
Yeah, they're fine. But instead of, it's worth $25,000. Yeah. But instead of organizing those, she's trying to come up with ideas that are going to get people excited.
Yeah,
and look what happened.
And you see it starting
people
to work
got excited
in the polls. Yeah. So last question for you, because even though we could talk to you all day, I'm sure you have other things on your agenda. But so as Democrats are pondering this question of electability, because when pollsters have run the numbers, and that is like the #1 concern. People want to make sure Trump gets out of there. So the top concern is who is most electable. Like, how should they be thinking about that?
I mean, clearly, if you don't win, then it doesn't matter who you nominated. So I don't want to completely dismiss the idea of electability, but the way it's practiced is that it says, this is what we understand, and this is what has worked before. However, for Democrats, it's more, this is what we understand, because it actually hasn't even worked that well for them. Like, only the Democratic primary voter would look at a guy who lost in 1988 in total disgrace. A quirky plagiarism scandal finished him off, but voters' lack of interest in him had finished him long before that. Ran again in 2008, finished with what, 0.5%?
Right. And 1%.
Yes. So he slinks out of that election. Is rescued by Obama, making him vice president, just says weird things for 8 years. And then the Democratic primary voters like, that's the guy.
Especially after the experience of Hillary Clinton.
Right. And so voters should interrogate, what is it about him that makes me think he's electable? And if it doesn't go past, he's an old white guy who's been in politics for a very long time. If there's nothing beyond that, then question whether or not your personal punditry is worth betting the party's future on.
And what would you, when they say, but you look at the polls, and right now in the polls, he does
top
best
of the
against,
race. Right.
well, not just
Right,
that, but he
because-
does best against Trump in Pennsylvania
Yeah.
and Michigan and these places. How do you explain that?
Look, maybe he wins. Trump is like incredibly unpopular. But are there other people who also have a path to victory? And separately, what is the downside risk if he wins? Let's say he wins and is as bad a president as we would all expect that he would be.
Right.
Then what happens next?
I think that's really
the
important.
time
question.
does not stop in 2020. There will be another election in 2024. Tom Cotton is not going anywhere.
Right.
The next fascist that you get might have some idea of what he's doing.
And be actually competent, which is the very scary scenario.
Right. And so what are you going to meet that force with? Are you going to meet it with Joe Biden, or are you going to meet it with something that can stand up to it?
Very interesting. Everybody should read the book. Obviously, it comes out Tuesday, May 28th. Buy 3 copies, we'll say.
At least 3. Yeah.
I'm buying 2.
Excellent.
Ryan, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you,
You
Ryan.
too.
And we will have more Rising after this.